Hello, I'm Shauna Robeson with Creating Space Coastal. Welcome to another episode of Healing Art After Hours, where I upload real-time videos of live Zoom creative workshops from my Healing Art Happy Hour meetups. In today's video, I will be continuing to demonstrate coloring tools and techniques using markers and gel pens, featuring Fibracolor water-based markers, Copic alcohol markers, and Jelly Roll gel ink pens. Handouts for the introduction to this topic are available for download at my shop at creatingspacecoastal.com. Links will be available below in the description. Happy coloring! The first thing I wanted to just show you, so we're going to be doing markers, water-based markers to start with. And I'm just going to show you a sample of one I did recently. So this is a color page. Now, be aware that the paper that you're using does impact how the coloring process goes. This is a fairly thin paper. It's nice and smooth, which is good. But it's real thin. It's more like printer paper. So it's not at all thick, like it's not a cardstock at all. But I tried all of these on this paper just to show you how it is. And it will impact what paper you use does impact the look of it. So this I did with just these are like the cheap you buy in a, I don't know, 100 pack. I bought them probably 10 years ago. And I'm not even exaggerating, maybe even more. And I don't know how they're still going. I mean, it was just a package of 100 colors. And a few of them have died over the years, but they're still going. But they were just really cheap. It wasn't anything fancy, but it's equivalent to like a Crayola marker, water-based ink, and it does pretty good for jobs that I want. I also tried out a really inexpensive version of some alcohol markers, and I kind of messed up because I don't have a lot of choices. I got them at Daiso. For those of you who are in the San Diego area, Daiso is a little kind of an Asian market that has a lot of miscellaneous stuff for really cheap. Everything's $1.50 if it's not priced. And these were, you got 2 markers for $1.50. So that's 75 cents a pop, which is for alcohol markers is really cheap. But they had a limited selection of colors. And they did not have good skin tones. And I tried to make some blush, and they don't blend, this paper I'm sure doesn't help either, but they don't blend quite like Copics do. So I wasn't able to reverse that. So it is what it is, but that's how you learn. And that's how you just explore. So, so she has really, really rosy cheeks, but otherwise, I was able to get some okay results with these really inexpensive alcohol markers, other than that, the mishap with the face. And I should have really practiced on a page. That brings me to a suggestion. Usually there's some extra pages in your coloring books that don't have anything. Maybe it has credits on it, or maybe just a blank page at the front or the back. This one does not have any, but I could still just pick a page that I don't think I'm going to color and use it as a sample page. And then you can try out a color before you commit. And that would have been a good time to do that with this color. So, so I do recommend to, like I said, pick a page. If there's not a blank one, just pick one that you don't like, or maybe you made a mistake on it and you can use the back. But you'll notice with alcohol markers, they bleed through really bad. So if you're using any kind of wet medium, I always put some kind of cardstock or something in between the pages to protect the following page, or else you're gonna ruin your next page. Especially with alcohol markers, but I even do that with water-based markers, because you can see that's come through as well. So anything wet, I always use a piece of cardstock in between. So that's what I did with those fairly inexpensive alcohol markers. And then I did one that was with the Copic markers, and I got a lot better effect with that. It's still, when you're working with alcohol, you have to work quickly and you have to do small areas, but then, sometimes that can mean that you get brush strokes and things like that. So it is a learning curve working with alcohol markers, and it does depend on the paper that you're using, but I still feel like I was able to do okay with it. I also played around with some gel. These are all gel pens. So, bling, bling. Obviously there's no skin tone. So I picked something that would have a lot of sparkle, and I used just the stippling to create some texture on the face because I wasn't able to do much as far as filling in skin tone. But so anyway, those are some examples of where we're headed. So with the water markers, and I've shown this technique before for those of you who have been with me for a while, but it's always a good reminder. So when you color with markers, what we typically do is, what we've done, when we were younger is we just take the marker and color in the lines. Okay, so I'm going to do a sample here. And you can do that. Let's see, I'm going to I'm following the same color themes. So I'm just going to, add some green. So you can just basically color in, right? And, before I continue, let me tell you what paper I'm using, because like I said, it does make a difference. And it's I just had the label here. Oh, here we go. Okay, so this is the Nina Classic Crest Cover Solar White, and it's smooth. So that's the paper that I'm using. And every time I use cardstock, I'm either using this, or I recently got the 110 for making cards, because this is nice. This is pretty thick, but it's maybe for a card base, it's a little thinner. So I got the thicker one to try that out, but this has worked for my card bases, for art and things like that. It's pretty smooth. It works fairly well for alcohol markers as well. Okay. And I always, whatever color or pigment thing I'm using, I do a color swatch. And here's mine for these, so I can tell what color they are. So I do recommend creating some kind of swatch chart so that you know, because this plastic color isn't necessarily going to be the color that you're going to find when you put it on the paper. And it's different on each paper. So put the swatch on. If you use a common paper, use that for your color swatches. So I use the same cardstock for my color swatches because I use this commonly, but it's going to look a little different even on a different paper, so do a sample test on that paper. But you just color in, right? That's the normal way. Oh, this is the lighter. But you may not get like really good blending effects when you just color directly on. And I like to have like a watercolor effect. So if I try to go in now with a wet brush and move that, it might move. And it might not, depending on the watercolor marker. So it's not moving too well. Let me zoom in a little bit. It's not moving it's moving my pigment a little bit. And again, this depends on the paper, it depends on the markers. Some markers are going to lift really nice, but I'm really not getting much there. So if I want that effect with these markers, what I'm going to do is use it like paint like watercolor with them. So how I do that is I can actually put the marker on a palette. I have two colors, a darker color and a lighter color, because I want the darker color to create more shadow. And then I can either use an aqua brush or just a paintbrush. You want a pretty firm tip because you want to control, you're moving pigment around. So just a small round brush, but then I can use this just like I would watercolor. Just paint it right on. And then if I add a little bit more water, I get a lighter color.
Shauna, you're out of the frame.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
There,
I have
yeah,
to.
there you go.
More technology. That's why I don't want to zoom in, but I want you guys to see what I'm doing. Okay, now I'm going to the lighter color and I can just paint it in there. Now, if you have a real thin paper, it might not handle that wet, it might start to warp a little bit with the wetness. And this even does a little bit. So you don't want to use a lot of water. You just want enough to get your pigment moving. You want to keep it fairly dry. And as you move, if you add a little water, it gets lighter and lighter. I'm getting really pigmented this time. I don't know why. This paper seems to be, you know what? I'm not even sure. Oh, that's why. I think this is a different paper I printed on, honestly. I don't know. It feels like it's not behaving the way I normally am used to it. So I'm like, oh, is this a different paper? I'm not sure, but I mean, it's still be able to do it, but it doesn't feel as smooth as I'm used to. And then maybe I want to do the little dots with the darker color. And it just gives you a little bit more control than if I was trying to draw these dots in here. I mean, I have a little bit of a sharp tip. I might be able to just drop it in. In this case, I can because I have a sharp tip. But let's say your tip's not great. Just gives you some control with it. This actually works pretty good for the tip. And then maybe I want these darker. I can draw that in. So wherever you want it really saturated color, you can use the marker. And then wherever you want it maybe more of a water wash look, you can put it on with a brush. These markers they're a tip, but then they also have a chisel side. So I can do big strokes or little strokes. So for, fairly reasonably priced markers, they're not bad. Okay, so I can kind of mix it up again there with that. Now I'm going to go for the red.
Quickly wanted to ask, you said these are the watercolor markers you bought long ago.
Yes.
And they were really inexpensive. What brand would you recommend now if we were going to go buy some?
Well, the ones that I see a lot of people, there's the Crayola markers. I mean, I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of like mid-grade artists, but if you just want the cheapest ones out there that has some kind of name, there's Crayola. But there are a lot of water-based markers out there. And I can't speak from experience with those because I haven't tried those. The only other water-based markers that I have are from Stampin' Up, which are more kind of an ink-based. They're so and I'll demonstrate that as well.
Okay.
But if somebody else has experience with some other water-based markers that they like, please feel free to chime in or put it in the chat. Because I honestly can't say, I usually like to give experience. I think Prismacolor even has a water-based marker set. But like I said, if you just want something cheap, but you want to know that it's, okay quality, Crayola I know has the water-based markers. It's probably similar to what I'm using.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. All right, so make sure I'm in the frame. And I'm putting a little bit darker on this side because this is the shadow side. And that's a big part of coloring, is imagining where the light is. If the light's coming from the front or maybe coming from this side. I'm kind of thinking front and this side. So that's why I'm putting my shadow or my darker shades on this end, and then I lighten it, especially in the front because it's round. And so the closest thing to the light is going to be lightest. So I try to lighten it up, and then maybe on the edge it has a little darkness, but if I imagine light hitting it from this angle, then this whole section might be lighter. So think about where your light is, where your shadow is, and just doing that will help you with just making your coloring a little bit more realistic, just giving it more dimension. Again, I don't know that this is the paper that I think I'm using. It's not feeling right. And I might have grabbed something off my shelf. Okay. You can always put the lighter colors in and then add layers of the darker shades. When I'm blending, I like to put them in kind of together, but I could just do the whole thing a lighter color and then add a dark color on top of it. That makes sense. So I'll do that over here. I can make this whole thing this lighter shade. Let me this is almost like an orange, but it looks red here, but on here it looks orange. And that's exactly why you do the swatch test. I think probably the regular red, I think maybe died. Like I said, I've had this for so long. And so I'm just doing all over. This is just another way you can do it, all over this light color. And then I can add the darker shade later to make the shadow. But this gives me a lot more control than if I were to, I would not be able to make my scarf look like that if I colored it, because it's going to be more saturated of a color. So if I tried to make this scarf light, I really would have a hard time I'd have to get a lighter color because this is saturating so much. So if I want to get a range with using this watercolor technique, I can get from this dark color all the way to this light color, just based on how much pigment to water I use. So you can do this, you can get blending with just coloring with the markers by just using a lighter color. So if I have this and then the next lightest color, I can get a blending effect. Let me just show you an example of what I mean. So I'm going to put this darkest red, so make sure I'm in the frame. I'm putting this darkest red here. So if you don't want to do the brush technique, and then I can kind of blend with using the next lighter color, I can still blend that color. And I still get a nice seamless line between the two colors just by, now this tip is a little more damaged, so I don't have as much detail, but I'm still getting, a pretty decent blend from this dark to light just by putting my dark down and then blending with that lighter color. And that's the same technique that I'll be using for the alcohol, but alcohol is a little bit different. It behaves a little bit different. So again, I'm going to put my darkest shade there. None of these are really light shades. I don't have really pale shades of this because I'm limited in what my colors are here. But I can still create some dimension just by laying down more than one color to give some shadow there. So can you see how as it rounds the corner, it's not getting as much light hitting it, so it's getting darker. And I did that just with with the markers not using the color brush. So here I can even now, since I've used the light color diluted, I can even just use the same color along the edge to get that. And then try to blend it out with a little bit of water. So you just have a little more choices. If you do this technique, if you know this technique, I should say, you can use it mixed in with, sometimes you might want to use the full pigment, and sometimes you might want to have a range, but it just gives you a whole spectrum of range of color with one marker. I don't have to have 4 shades of this orange, and I can still get all of this gradient of color by using this technique. So that's basically mostly what I want to show you that. I'm going to do a little bit of gray. Oh, that's kind of a blue. I didn't look at my color swatch. I was in a hurry. Let me check okay, that's better. This is especially nice if you want subtle color. Like I just want to have a hint of the gray to highlight the light colors, the white. So I can just lay a little bit of gray down on these edges. And if I try to do that with the full gray, see, it's a lot darker. It's harder to get that subtle shade that I want, unless I have a blending pen. Now, some markers have a clear blender marker that goes with it, that is made from the same binding material, whatever the base of the liquid is, and that will be a solvent that will allow you to move that pigment around. And then you can soften up, you might be able to soften up that color a little bit and do the same thing like you would do with water. If I really feel like this paper, I don't know, feels different, but anyway, sometimes if it's depending on the marker, like I said, you can just use water. As soon as you put it down, you just use water to soften it up too. So play around with your water soluble markers. It's just to give you some ideas of how to do a little bit more than what you might have typically thought you could do with the marker. Again, I'm just putting some shadow on each side just to make that hat kind of pop. Just a little hint color, because that's white. I don't want to make it, but typically things don't look white. They have lights and darks to them. So I'm just giving it a little dimension by adding a little gray. Adding a gray along the sides. I can, run a little bit gray across to make a shape. Maybe I want a little blue. A lot of the coloring techniques are similar, but the media behaves differently. So it's a learning curve, whatever you're using. But you can get a lot of the same dimension no matter what you use if you just use certain techniques, like thinking about where shadows are. Like underneath the scarf, I'm thinking, okay, there's a little bit of maybe a shadow from the scarf. So I'm going to add a little bit of gray under there, and that just gives it a little bit, tells a bit of the story. It's like, okay, that's 3-dimensional. And it may not look 3-dimensional, without that. That just helps tell the story that, oh, this is actually on another plane compared to the little penguin. And by layering or glazing, just adding additional layers. And be careful, again, if it's, you don't want to keep it getting too wet because the paper fibers, depending on the quality of the paper, it could damage the paper. But if you keep it fairly, dry, you can just keep adding a little bit of color, creating some more dimension. Now, let's see, I want to make this a little bit brighter. And then I'm going to try to create some like folds, little folds in the fabric. Just by adding some darker lines to look like there's parts of the fabric that are folded. It just starts to give it some character. Okay. And honestly, coloring is just so relaxing because you don't have to make the art. You can, maybe you already did the art, but you can do it at whatever level you're at. If you don't know like the shading and the whatever, that doesn't matter. You could still have fun and just get color down. And it's still meditative and kind of zen. So, all right. And then if I want to, I can put a little bit of like, I don't know, some snow colors in. I can mix the colors here too. I don't know, just make like a messy. Okay, so that is water soluble. Now, I can also do that same technique, pretty much exactly the same. Water soluble stamp pads. In this case, and I'm not going to show you a whole one, but I just want to do this little sample. With the Stampin' Up! Pads, and that's the dye-based ink is typically, you can squeeze it and it puts a little bit of the pigment on the top of the lid. And then I could just grab it from there. Otherwise, you can, put some on the, I wouldn't take the brush directly to the pad, but you could, do a stamp onto something or like to lift it. But again, I can just take that. If it's too dark, I can add a little bit of water, lighten it up. Now this becomes more permanent after you use it there. It's better color. Because it's an ink based. Then say like a watercolor. So same technique, just using a different pigmented medium. So if all you have is stamp pads, you could still do some coloring. It'll get weird. So now it's okay, there we go. All right. And with Stampin' Up, I used to be a Stampin' Up, but that's why I know. But with Stampin' Up, they also have markers the same colors as their inks. So if you want to do, if you want to do some stamping and ink or coloring with markers, you can match the colors. So that's kind of a nice thing. And I think there's other brands that do that sort of thing too. Maybe they have matching colored pencils or matching, things that, so you can use mixed media, but then know that you're getting the same color. Okay. Now I want to show you the alcohol marker. Now, here's my color swatches, and this is a good example. And because with the alcohol markers, typically you really, what they're great for is blending. So you typically want to have like a triad of colors, so you can do light, medium, and dark of one shade. So for example, this light green, this is actually 3 markers that I use to create this gradient. Now you can see how these really cheap, these are called Fluently, that I got at the Daiso. You can see the difference in their blending. I had a really hard time getting them to blend. Now, maybe they don't like this paper. Maybe on different paper they would do better. This paper is not necessarily alcohol marker paper, but it tends to do pretty good. Like these are my Copic markers down here, not these. These ones are my Copic markers, and you can see that they blend pretty nice on this paper. So just because something doesn't blend for you doesn't mean that it's necessarily bad. It may just be that the type of paper isn't the right paper for it. The marker paper is usually really fine, really smooth, tightly woven, maybe like a vellum is typically what's designed for these types of markers. So be aware of that. Printer paper is not usually a great option because it's not really that smooth, even though it feels smooth and you touch, you don't feel any texture, but compared to a smooth paper, it's just that the fibers aren't as woven as tightly. But for card making and stuff like this, this paper that I use works pretty well with the Copics. And so that's what I use. I also try to do some blending with some of the Bic markers, which is kind of similar to Sharpie. So basically the Bic markets. And, I got a little bit of blending, but, not seamless by any, stretch of the imagination. But you can play around with using them. I'm still getting a gradient. I can still create this gradient. I just have to, it may not just be as seamless as it would be with a Copic marker, for example. Now, Copics are not inexpensive, but the one thing that's great about Copics is that they do offer, you can purchase refill, or you can refill them. So you can get refill ink, and not all of them have that option. So that is a nice option for the Copic markers. Now, this is how I have mine organized. And I put a little swatch of my triad. Like I said, I have all of them. I try to buy them in a triad of a light, medium, and dark color in the same color family. And what I mean by that is this, for example, is, well, this is orange, which is usually always a warm. But sometimes, like for example, the reds can have a more blue hue. So if it's got more blue in it, it looks more pink. So this is more pink, more blue red, and this one's more of an orange or a yellow type red. So warmer family and a cooler family. You don't want to mix, you don't want to have the lightest color be, pink, and then the medium color be orange red. So you want to have your families together. So what I do is I put them together. I do a little swatch of them blended together. So I can see which ones belong together in case I use them for some other project. Maybe I only use one color, but I know which ones I like to go together. And I just tuck it into my actual storage so I can tell which, not only where I store them, but how I typically like to use them. And I can also see an example of what the color looks like. So that's what I do for the Copics. I'm going to pick up some of my green color. Now you can just use 2 or 3, depends on how big your project is. You can still just blend with 2 colors. It's just the 3 gives you the full range from light, medium to dark. So, but it's up to you, you know, what you want to do. I'm going to take the spread. And then I also want kind of a cooler toned neutral on gray. So I'm going to take just 2 grays. I don't probably need the darkest gray because I'm just doing like a shadow. And then the other thing that you'll find with the alcohol markers is they do have a blender pen as well. But I'll tell you what, these work more like an eraser than for blending. They tend to lift the color or move the color. So I use it more, and I'll show you an example of that, but I use it more for creating highlights after I've laid down color. Or sometimes if I go outside a line, because these do bleed. So you have to be careful if you go right to the edge of the line, it might bleed over depending on how porous your paper is. So do a little sample on your paper to see how it behaves. But if it does go over the line, I make a little misstep. I can actually put this alcohol, it's basically alcohol inside. I can use this to push the pigment back towards where I want. So it actually, like, let's say it's outside the line here, I can just put it there to move it back the other way. So, and I'll demonstrate that too. But so don't think you're gonna really blend with this, even though it's called a blender. I think it's called a blender marker. It doesn't really, yeah, colorless blender. It says that, but I don't know. I haven't really seen how to use it as a blender. I think for sometimes what people will do is lay a coat of alcohol down first so that the other colors blend better on top of it, because it blends better when it's wet. So it's a way of saturating the landscape, if you will, and then coloring on top of it. But I think it's fine not doing that. I don't think you have to do that necessarily. So, okay, there are a couple different ways that people do the blending with these markers. And I do both ways, and it depends on what you're, you know, what paper you're using, again, and how well one or the other works. But I like to do light to, or I like to do dark to light. Typically, some people say, okay, I'll just demonstrate on this cheap, you know, this is a thin paper, but I want to demonstrate what I'm saying. So using my little guide, I can tell which one's light, because sometimes you can't tell by looking at it, the color on the plastic. So this is the lightest color. So to do light to dark, you typically would cover the whole area that you want to color. Then you color the area you want darker, or, you know, with the medium color. And then you color the darkest color. And then you go in and you take the lightest color and kind of blend them all out. Now, for me, I think that uses a lot of the light color. And while that works, I feel like it might be a little bit wasteful. It's similar, like putting down that clear coat of it's sort of like the same idea of putting this clear layer down to have everything move well. And I get that, but I think you can do it the other way with it and not use that. So I'm going to show you the other way that I often try to do it. So what I'll do is I lay down the dark layer. Then I come with my medium. And then I come with the light. And I do blend it all out with the light. So that typically can work fine. You might get some better blending, like see how that's a little bit smoother blending there. So that on this paper, this works better than this. But I find for the most part that I can get away with doing that and I don't have to use as much pigment. This is the third way of laying down this clear first. And then I can lay down probably the dark because it's already wet. And then medium. and light. And then I go light all over. So I think that's one way you can use the blender as a blender, but otherwise you'll notice if I just run this in the middle and I keep running that, I create a line. And that's what I mean by it erases it. Let's say I want this not to be sticking out. I can kind of push this pigment back a little bit by running this along its edge. And it basically, the liquid pushes the other liquid the other way. So you can kind of do a little erasing that way too. So for highlights, this is a great tool. Okay, so that's just a little sample of using some different blending techniques that I will be using. Now this is a small area. One thing I do recommend is some people will just open up all their markers and kind of lay them out because you have to move quick. I don't like to do that because alcohol evaporates quickly, and especially in a dry environment, I feel like it's gonna, again, evaporate my alcohol, and I don't like to do that. So I'll hold them by the tips I want to use. These ones have a fine brush tip, and you can get into little details, and it also has a chisel tip for broad areas. I don't personally use the chisel tip all that much. It's firmer, so you can get more control, but it's not a fine tip. Some of them do have a fine tip. This one's a chisel tip. So I don't use that one as much, but I hold it. I have, you'll see that there's a band here, so you can tell which side the tip is on. There's a band where the brush tip is, and there's no band where, and that's of course for Copics. I don't know how the other ones are set up, but so I can tell which tip I'm going to be getting based on that ring. And so I just hold them by the cap in the order that I'm going to be using them. And then I just lift them out, and then I can seat them back in. Now you can also kind of keep them, you could do it the other way where you kind of keep a loose cap on them and then just lift, but then I have to kind of move my hand around, and that doesn't work as well for me. So personally, I like to just do it this way. I just hold it in the order light, medium, dark, and then I can just pop them out and in as I want to. So I'm gonna lay down my darkest color. And I'm just gonna do small areas at a time because I wanna make sure it's wet. I could probably do more than I'm doing, but just want to really illustrate the fact that, and then I don't want it to be as dark on this side. So I'm going to use just the medium side to do my dark side on this side. Yes, that's a firework in case you guys can hear it. And then I can blend out that. So I have a little darkness over there, but the light's kind of coming, but I have the darkest shadow on this side. And then I have the lightest in the front. So I'm creating some depth. Okay, so same deal up here. And I'm going over the top of the dark color too with my medium color. It's all about you just keep going over the other colors, and that's how you blend. You always want to blend with the light color. Not the darker color. So I can always go back in if I feel like my lines aren't real smooth. I can go back in with the lightest color and blend out the whole thing. Now maybe I want to create some more depth. Now, a little goes a long way. It moves, again, depending on the paper. So see how quickly it's moving before you get close to those edges. See how far it's blooming out from the origin of where you put the color, because it's really easy, especially on porous paper, to have it bleed beyond your lines. So it's definitely a learning curve, learning how close can I get to the edge. Sometimes I'll come in a little bit and then I'll wait and then I'll go back and fill it in if I think it might go past where I want it to go. One of the biggest challenging, projects I've done with these are on those coloring books where it has a big face, and I'm trying, and the paper's not great, and it dries, maybe it absorbs really fast, dries really quick, and trying to not have it have streaks, and it's challenging because that paper, it's not designed for that paper. So if you struggle, it could be that the paper, it may not be your technique, or maybe you do too big of a section at a time. Now I can go back in and add some darker colors if I want. And then I just, lay down the dark and then blend it with the light. There we go. So see how you can get just these really nice, seamless, light to dark shades. Maybe I want it this top to be a little lighter than that. Maybe I want there to look like there's, light coming on top of that heart. If it creates too harsh of a line when you add the colorless, you can always blend with your light. They're just really fun to play with. But, they're a little fussy. I mean, it's having to go back and forth. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just use two colors over here. You want the colors to be fairly close to each other. I could do really dark and a really light next to each other, but I'm not going to get as seamless as a line. It's going to be more obvious. So the closer they are together, the better they're going to work. So I'm going to use the two lightest colors. And I think I'm going to do it the other way this time. This time I'm going to do the light first. You know what? I'm actually gonna, I want to leave these little dots white. I'm going to try to leave those light. They're a little tricky to work around, but okay, so do the light first, and now I'm going to put the dark in. Whether you do the light or dark first, you always end up going back with the light to do the final blending. So I'm putting in the dark color. Let's see how harsh that line is. And then when I go in with the light again, it's going to basically kind of blend. It's going to take a little bit of that darker pigment and it's going to just soften up that line. So you don't have just a harsh light to dark line. All right. I'm doing light to dark again. Somebody's not muted. So did you have a question or is it just, I'm hearing just some background noise. And sometimes that'll steal other people's video. So if you are not asking a question, I just ask that you stay muted to help people who don't know how to maybe pin me. Let's make this whole section, okay. Dark. And dark on this side. It's really, it's just a lot of back and forth. You get used to it. I don't mind. I like the effect of you know, the alcohol markers. They're fun to play with. And they work better on some things than others. I think, no, never mind. I changed my mind. I was gonna try to use the chisel, but I think I prefer the brush tip. So I'm just gonna, I'm doing dark first. I'm just gonna lay in my little shadow. A little shadow in the middle between these. There's a lighter shadow just underneath. Be careful when you're getting close to another color. You can, you know, inadvertently drag the other color too. So just be careful not to, you know, dip your pen too much into the next color, that if you don't want to get that color in, you know, because like for example, the red, if I were to, you know, dip the nib into the red, I might pick up some of that pigment and lay it down in other places I don't want it. So just be a little careful. Now I'm going to try something with the clear. I just put a little bit of pigment down. I didn't fill the whole thing. So I'm just going to maybe using the one color, I can kind of blend it out a little bit. Yeah, it's not great. I really don't feel like it. It's not great. I thought I'd give it a try, but it moves it a little bit. I don't know if you guys can see that, but I moved the pigment a little bit, but mostly it just makes it a little bit faded. It doesn't really lift it like I want. So I'm gonna leave that white. And then I'm gonna do a little bit of gray on these guys. Let me make this side darker. And then maybe a little bit of some snow and soften that up. All right. So there is alcohol markers. And then I think what I'll do, because I want to show you guys gel pens, but I don't want to do a whole thing of gel pens. Gel pens, I wouldn't normally do a whole
picture with. I was just trying to do that as a challenge with my coloring book. Like, okay, this whole page is going to be this one thing. But oftentimes I will mix it up. So I did alcohol markers maybe for my base color, but these guys have all of these different, they have metallic, they have classic solid colors, which I don't actually use too often. This moonlight color, which is, I think, is that I think that's the one that I'll show you samples of them, but I mostly use the Stardust, which is kind of glitter, or the metallic. Those are the two I like the best, because usually I'm just trying to add some accents and highlights to something that I have. Like the moonlights are the fluorescent ones. So these work really great on like dark paper or black paper, especially. And then these ones have a metallic look, but they have a background hue, but I find that they just all end up either looking silver or gold on everything I put them on. So I don't know if I'm doing something wrong, but there's a color palette of them here. So you can see what they look like. They actually have the circles there so you can fill them in for this particular kit. But I do, like with everything else, I recommend doing a color swatch. And I do like the Jelly Roll as far as the gel pens go. They, I mean, a lot of them do dry up. And I don't know if, I think that's more about them being gel pens, but I think some brands might be more prone to that than others. So I do recommend storing them either, well, I store them laying down flat. Because the problem is if you store them with the tip up, the ink might move and you create a bubble, and it's really hard to get these started once they stop working. If you store them facing down, sometimes they leak. They just come out because it's a ball tip. So I think the safest thing is to store them horizontal. So that's my recommendation. So I like to use them, like I said, to just kind of make my embellish or accent, create accents on my art pieces. So that's what I'm going to do with these guys. For this guy, I'm just going to use this little glittery one to make these little, let me get closer, to make these little circles here, these little dots, sparkly. So I'm just going over the top. Now, the thing about gel pens is that they take a little bit to dry, and it's really easy to smudge. Like, well, see, that's, oops, let me show you where I'm actually filming. So if I touch this, it's going to smudge. And so you got to be careful not to put your hand on where you've been coloring with them until you've given them a chance to dry. You can also heat set them with a little, heat tool, so they dry faster. But just be aware that they do take a little time to dry. And so many times I've, because it's the final touch is not when I want to make a boo-boo. So just be aware and try to keep your hand out of off of them. And I plan where I put it. So I did this side first, because if I did over here and then I try to color over here, then I'm going to put my hand right in there. So I think about where I want it and where I don't want it. I'm also going to make a little bit of some, shimmery along the hat. Yeah, so be strategic in how you do your coloring. I think I'm actually going to make these guys that too. I always go from left to right for that reason. And it was really tricky when I was doing that whole page of because I really had to keep my hand off of it. So keep that in mind. but they're really fun. They're fun to use. And we were talking about that last time. If you use a light touch rather than pressing hard on them, it's less likely to make those streak marks in the pen. Because it's a roller ball. So if I press hard and I draw it, sometimes it might create a white, kind of the middle might be white and then the pigments on either side of it. This isn't really showing up that way, but the white marker or the white gel pens, I think, show that even more. So just be aware, if you go lightly, it's going to move that ball, get the pigment going, but isn't going to create streaks as much as if you press harder. And it also pushes the paper pigment, you know, it creates marks in the paper because of the ball. So be really kind of light with them when you're applying, and that'll help you, I think. I'm going to go ahead and maybe use a little bit on the feet since I didn't really have my orange out. That's fun, festive. Okay. So these are great for embellishments. Like I said, little sparkles here and there for with the metallic or the sparklies. That's what I mainly use them for, but there's a lot of different applications, especially if you use I use it in my black journal as well. Fluorescent ones work great for that. So, okay, I'm not going to do, like I said, a whole picture based on the gel pens, but I did want to just review what I did when I did that whole picture with them. Let me back this up a little bit. Oh, this one. So as you can see, I just did I used a little stippling to create some of the contours of her face. And I used some metallic and I used some of the sparkle, and I just, you know, changed the colors up to just add some, and I changed the type of marker, you know, or the type of gel pen I used. Also, some of them were just the normal ones, and then some were metallic, and then some were the glitter. So that just gives a lot of fun texture with them. So you can certainly use them for bigger projects, but I find that they work best for accents. This is that moon glow one, and you can in some of the spots you can see the purple coming through, but a lot of it just looks silver. So I don't know. It gives that hint of the color behind it. And there's some silver ones, silver-based ones, and then gold-based ones too. So, okay. So that's that. How are we doing on time? Oh, we're at 8:30 now. And I think I covered all of the markers that I wanted to make sure to cover, all the types. Let's see if this is still wet. Oh, I did want to give you one tip, and I'll show you how I use that. And that's for the gel markers, because you can benefit from the fact that they take a while to dry. It's hard to tell because it's underneath the stippling. But what I did was, and I'm gonna do it here. What I did was find a gray. I guess it doesn't matter what color. Let me do it on a sample sheet. Somebody somewhere, some YouTube artist had this little trick, and I never thought of that. So I thought I would try it, and it actually worked. So I have this silicone scraper, and it can allow you could probably use an eraser too, like more like a rubber eraser. But if you lay down a little color, let me just pick something, Shauna. Okay, I'm gonna lay down some of this green. I'll make sure you guys can see what I'm doing. It's more obvious. I'm going to actually do red because obviously I have a bigger area. But I'm just going to lay down some pigment along the edge. And then if I use this, I can actually like have it pull that pig color a little bit. So you can kind of get it to move. Not a lot. It's really just a little bit, but it's something. It can give you just not a hard edge. If you just want a little bit of a feathered edge, you can just lay down some pigment and then use your tool. I think it worked better with the metallic one. I'll try it with this. Yeah, this one's a lot juicier. Anyway, but it's, you know, it's not great, but it does move it a little bit. So if you want to get it not so hard edged, you can try that just with a little silicone tool. You can use if you have a silicone paintbrush, that would work better. I just didn't have anything like that. So, okay. That's enough about those guys. Any questions?
Thank you so much for watching this episode of Healing Art After Hours. You can download materials related to this topic, including PDF notes of PowerPoint presentations, at creatingspacecoastal.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you found this content helpful, and join me for the next video here at my Creating Space Coastal channel, where I hope to inspire you to create space in your life for fun. Thank you.